Hello and welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers, and you are in season 4 of Wrestling at Random. And the randomizer is taking us back to a somewhat familiar place. It can be a dark place sometimes. You never know what you're going to find when you head to the sound stages of Universal Studios into the Impact Zone for an episode of TNA Impact Wrestling. Jeremy, this is from my favorite era of TNA television. This is from the Fox Sports Net era of TNA, which I remember watching every week. I think it was on in Chicago, like in the afternoon or something. I remember it being on at a weird time, but I was watching a lot of TNA Impact back then.
That makes one of us. I did know it existed. It was not my cup of tea. And I think I did pop in and check out a Fox Box era show because it aired like multiple times on Fox Sports Net. It was like anytime there was the best damn sports show period, it was always like followed by TNA Impact.
Well, yeah, so like here in Chicago on Fox Sports Net Chicago at that time, the Blackhawks road games at least were on Fox Sports Net Chicago. All the Bulls games were on that channel. I'm sure I didn't really watch any, but there were White Sox games on that channel. You had a few Cubs games on that channel. So you had a lot going on, but you also had weekly TNA Impact Wrestling. And this was, if nothing else, we'll get to it later, this is one of the peaks of the X Division era of TNA.
Yeah, no, I've delved into the history of TNA Impact in previous episodes. So because we've actually done, this is the 5th episode we've covered a TNA show in the free feed, and we've also done one in the bonus content as well. So this is the 6th time we've done a TNA show.
Across the spectrum, we should mention, I believe we've done at least one episode of TNA Impact from the Spike TV era. We have this one, which is our first time that we've done one from the Fox Sports Net era. We've done 2, one on the free feed and one on the bonus feed from the weekly pay-per-view era, the start of the show. And then we've done, I believe, one of the Vince Russo era pay-per-views of TNA Impact.
We did. That was actually episode 1. Yeah, episode 1 of season 4 was the Against All Odds pay-per-view from 2008. But if you want to hear about the history of this promotion and what TNA is, go back to season 2, episode 2. That was where we reviewed one of their weekly pay-per-views from August 7th, 2002.
With go back to
season 2, episode 2. It is one of the worst television segments that I've ever watched in pro wrestling. Go listen to that episode if you haven't. Holy cow, is that horrendous. And then we actually, in season 2, episode 6, we reviewed an episode from 2005, but September of the same year of the episode we're going to review right now, which is from February of 2005. So just a few 7 months later.
Yeah, and that 7 months later episode, that was during that strange in-between time where they were no longer on Fox Sports Net. They had not yet started on Spike TV, and so they were airing on the internet in 2005.
Which is not good. Nobody was going to the internet for video in 2005.
No, things did not move well through the tubes on the internet in 2005. Al Gore had not figured that out yet.
So we'll just get right into this show, and we will talk about how this show opens. It opens with a recap of Abyss attacking Jeff Hardy with a black hole slam last week. Then Abyss throws him through a table on the outside.
A huge press slam from inside of the ring. Abyss tosses, or as the kids would say, yeets one Jeff Hardy over the top rope through this table. This was a terrifying spot. It was also just a run-of-the-mill Jeff Hardy bump because that's what he did. If you looked very closely through this grainy video, you could see that the match that Abyss interfered in was Jeff Hardy against Chris Candido.
We then start this week's episode from the Impact Zone at Universal Studios Orlando in front of 600 fans. they have a ton of indoor pyro. I
Oh
was
my God.
shocked by what budget is this coming out of? Yeah. Holy cow.
They did not have, even 2 years later when I went to I went to a TNA pay-per-view. I think I've mentioned that on previous episodes. When I was in Florida on a family vacation, I had no idea there was a pay-per-view. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go. There was not as much pyro in 2007 in the soundstage as there was here. The other thing that's notable is how horrible the audio mix is at the beginning of this show. We've got Mike Tenay and Don West, your quintessential TNA broadcast team, running down what's coming up on the show, and it is almost impossible to hear them between the pyro and the loud cheers from the crowd.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it because it's timely. Don West passed away the week that we are recording this, so sad that Don West has passed away from cancer at the time of this recording. And watching him here, this is Don West. We've talked about him in previous episodes. Don West not having a commentary background, not really having a pro wrestling background at all, but being a hype man, a salesman, and just a guy with a ton of enthusiasm. And when he got into this product and he got into what he was watching, and his job was to sell it, he got really good at it.
Yes.
Like, really good. And
you could tell, developed a genuine love for pro wrestling and for calling pro wrestling with Mike Tenay. And yeah, we're about 2.5, 3 years into his run with TNA, and he is very, very good. Like you said, selling. Like the theme of this show, it's a 1 hour show leading into the Against All Odds pay-per-view, which threw me off because I still always recall every pay-per-view that TNA did being Victory Road. But apparently it was not. It was Against All Odds here coming up. They hammered home all the top matches for this show throughout. Like there is no way you could watch this show and not know when Against All Odds was, how to order it, and what the top 5 or 6 matches were. So from that standpoint, like that's one of the things we always talk about with weekly TV episodes that we're parachuting into is there something they're building to? Did they do a good job of building it? Did they tell us what was coming? This show did a fantastic job of that, as we'll see throughout.
And what's extra surprising is we always usually make fun of TNA for a lot of their incompetence and stuff that's not good. This Against All Odds show is continuing a streak where they're coming off of like 3 consecutive months of highly touted pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Like I went back and read the Observer reviews from the previous shows, and there was a lot of pressure on this Against All Odds show because they're coming off of like 3 straight really good pay-per-views, and this was going to be one of the weaker main events. But apparently it held its own as well, and it was a totally fine main event and a great rest of the show to where it was another good pay-per-view in a row for TNA.
Yeah, and I was ordering the pay-per-views during this time period. Like I was so desperate to find something to replace what the death of WCW and the death of ECW, the void that it had left as far as weekly television wrestling. I mean, I was buying DVDs from Japan, bootleg style, from a guy at IWA Mid-South shows that I'd sit next to in the front row. But outside of that, there was nothing on TV wrestling-wise that I enjoyed watching. And then TNA started to get, at least the pay-per-views started to get really good. There were a lot of the guys you were seeing on the indie shows in IWA or Ring of Honor were on these shows in the X division. And yeah, it gave me my fix. So I'm interested to see here, if this TV show kind of lives up to that.
Christopher Daniels joins Mike Tenay and Don West on commentary for our opening match. It opens with Shark Boy.
Oh God. I'm immediately like, oh, the one thing I remember hating from TNA back then was Shark Boy, just the comedy. I could never get into Shark Boy. I'd see him on indie shows sometimes in Chicago here, and there were so many great guys in the X division, and they tell us when they're running down this show, they say it's going to be a showcase for the X division, and then the first guy that comes out is Shark Boy, and I am like, oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, oh no, he's going to bite someone's butt during this match, and it's going to be hilarious.
It's contractually obligated to do so. He will be fired. We will be fired if he does not do that.
But you mentioned X Division, and TNA tells us that AJ Styles is your X Division champion. So again, we're parachuting in. It's always interesting to see how quickly am I aware of who all the champions are.
Yes.
And right away, I know that AJ Styles is the focal point of this promotion, and like he's like the future of this promotion, and he's your X Division champion. And then I will hear about the rest of the champions as the show goes around.
We already hear, though, to bolster your point, when they do the rundown at the start of the show, they tell us that at the pay-per-view, the main event will be Jeff Jarrett defending the NWA World title, because it was still the NWA World title in TNA at this point, against Kevin Nash. And the best part about this, and it's an ongoing thing throughout the show, including a hilarious backstage segment, unintentionally, but the story is that Kevin Nash is training harder than he ever has in his life because he wants to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And I howled with laughter.
The story is that Kevin Nash usually doesn't care and doesn't try. But today, this feud, he's trying. So Jeff's going to be in big trouble. It's like Orange Cassidy's gimmick is Kevin Nash's gimmick.
It is, except unironically, I guess, would be the only difference. The other thing that is just hilarious about this, and we'll see it later in the backstage segment, is that we are supposed to believe that Shane Douglas has been helping train Kevin Nash, the same as Shane Douglas, who was basically completely screwed out of his spot in WWE by being really just completely torpedoed by the Clique, including Kevin Nash, when Shane Douglas was feuding with Shawn Michaels as Dean Douglas. It's so funny to see quasi-retired backstage announcer Shane Douglas lending moral support and training advice to Kevin Nash.
So Shark Boy's opponent, he's accompanied by Scott D'Amore. It's Petey Williams representing Team Canada.
A favorite of mine back then, Petey Williams.
We get the Fox box, like you mentioned, at the top of the screen. So that's your, like when you watch a baseball game or you watch a basketball game or a hockey game, you've got the score, you've got the participants, and you've got the clock. And so it looks like a regular sporting event. And it's interesting because while it gives it that Fox Sports feel and vibe, it also puts a constraint on you that although this is a taped show, you're not going to have the ability to do a lot of editing because there's a clock up there.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you can't do a lot of editing. You can't, say 1 minute left in the time limit of a 10-minute time limit match when it's actually only gone 7 minutes. It forces wrestling to do the one thing that wrestling hates to do the most, be honest.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting concept. The other production note, this is the 6-sided ring era of TNA. So not the traditional 4-sided ring, more of the Lucha AAA looking 6-sided ring. I was never offended by the 6-sided ring, but I also found it to be nobody ever did anything interesting enough with the 6 sides to warrant having a 6-sided ring.
The problem, if you can call it a problem, the issue is that the guys who were used to it didn't use it any differently than a 4-sided ring. And then when you brought in guys from the outside that were longtime veterans that had only wrestled in a 4-sided ring, like DDP, who we'll see later, it more often than not completely threw them off. They lost their bearings. They didn't know where to go. So really, it didn't add anything other than, hey, look, visually we're different.
It's all Shark Boy early. Petey starts going to work, and we're told there's also no draws in TNA. There's a judge. That judge is Larry Zbyszko. If we go to the time limit, he will make a decision on who the winner is. It's
one man judging things. It's another step beyond, I guess, the early UFCs where they didn't have rounds and they just had 3 guys judging the total of the fight, including Dave Meltzer for at least one show. Here it's just Larry Zbyszko is judge, jury, and executioner for these matches.
Shark Boy with a Rana off the top. He goes back up top, hits a missile drop kick, gets a 2 count, and there's way more Shark Boy offense than I was anticipating here. He's on offense for a long time.
It's a theme of this show because there's another match in particular with a more obvious jobber even than Shark Boy here against a bigger star than Petey Williams, and the offense is more lopsided in the favor of the jobber than it even is here.
We get Shark Boy attempting a move that is countered into a Canadian Destroyer. He goes for the Canadian Destroyer. Shark Boy counters it with a neck breaker. He almost runs into the ref, turns around, gets hit with the Canadian Destroyer for the pin. Now, Canadian Destroyer, very popular move in 2022. In 2005, this was more of a controversial move. Like, people thought this move was either the coolest thing they've ever seen or the most ridiculous thing they've ever seen. And there was no middle ground.
Well, I can speak to this as I was at IWA Mid-South shows when they first brought in Petey Williams in 2004 when he first started doing this move. And I was front row. And the first time I saw it, I lost my mind. Like, we jumped out of our seats. Petey Williams became a folk hero in IWA Mid-South based entirely on this move. And I think I fell in the category of both. It was completely ridiculous, and it was the coolest thing I had ever seen.
Yeah, it was very controversial. Some people loved it. Some people hated it. But it was pretty spectacular. And in 2005, no one would have any idea the influence that move would have, as it would become such a common spot in 2022. It's completely nuts to think about that the Canadian Destroyer became such a popular move that everybody did. Well, you wouldn't think of it.
The weirdest thing about it is that it very, very, very quickly went from finisher to transition spot that didn't end matches. And to be honest, I can't remember anybody other than Petey Williams using it as a finisher. It very quickly just became a spectacular move that would get a near fall that people would believe no matter how many times it didn't end a match just because it was so spectacular. But even to the point to where a guy that we'll see later on this show, Dustin Rhodes, in recent years, in the 2020s, has used the Canadian Destroyer for non-finished near falls.
Raven, Dustin Rhodes, and some dude are backstage.
I have no idea who this man is. I spent way too much time trying to figure it out. Completely unsuccessful.
Hey, Big Dust. I just want to say thanks, man. Thanks for having my back. Thanks for watching out for me.
The girls are having a slumber party. Why wasn't I invited? Hey, look, I'm sorry about your fingers. I just want to apologize. You know that was an accident.
Well, yeah, sure.
And Dustin, big fan for years. I always felt like you were lost in the shuffle. However, now I feel like you're shuffling around with the lost.
Is that right?
Yeah, and how about this? Imagine your scrotum locked in a vice.
My scrotum?
Yeah, imagine my hand on the handle. Now imagine our future pay-per-view relationship, because that's what it's going to be.
Well, suck it, duck it, quack, quack. Imagine my foot up your ass at against all odds. How about that?
Hey, calm down, big boy. Yeah. Calm down.
Calm down. Nothing. It's just like that. Guys like that, I try to teach you. I try to teach all the other.
I had to look it up. This dude is Cassidy Riley.
When I saw him, my only thought was, if Terry Taylor was 25 years old in 2005, this is visually what Terry Taylor would look like. I've never heard that name in my life. Cassidy Riley. And I was watching the show back then. What?
Raven outright said he was going to put Dustin's testicles in a vice at the pay-per-view. Dustin will be facing Raven at the pay-per-view.
Dustin Rhodes responded, by the way, with saying, "Shucky Ducky," somehow channeling Booker T.
You cannot hear the ring announcer like WCW. We've had this conversation if you listen to our Nitro reviews, where they just have the audio in arena and not into the TV feed. So the The ring announcer is just announcing for the arena, and you only hear what the arena mics are picking up. It's not direct into the feed. I hated that in WCW. I hate it here as well. That is a production decision. Someone made that decision, and I hate it. I hate that decision ever gets made. Why? What's the other side of the argument of you know what we should do? We should not pump that into the TV feed. How do you defend it?
What is being gained by doing it that way? It's almost as difficult to figure out why you would make that decision as something else we've talked about a lot here on this podcast when talking about TNA and comparing it to WWF and WWE. The entrance music that we get no gap between them. It's just entrance music, and the second it stops, the next guy's entrance music hits. The entrance music does not last for very long, which I guess is positive in that everybody's entrance music is terrible and sounds mostly the same, but nothing gets a chance to breathe. You don't have those moments where the music stops, the crowd gets excited because who's going to come out, or they know who's going to come out. They're excited to hear that music. It's just go, 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 go.
It's only WWE that can get that right.
Yes.
I mean, even modern day AEW still hasn't gotten that right. It's WWE masters at this. But everybody else just go, move. Don't let it breathe, move. And this was, same case here. The music was horrendous. Last time we talked about horrendous music was the TLC review from 2011.
Oh boy.
You can go back just a couple weeks ago in your free feed right here. There are some horrible songs there. Here, we've got a horrible theme song that I will play a little bit of later on. So stay tuned for that one.
Well, the bad thing about that is that theme song that you're going to play, which is terrible, it somehow is probably one of the best theme songs on this show. But that is the ultimate damning with faint praise, because it at least is like a theme song. Whereas the stuff from that TLC in 2011, they were bad songs, lame songs that didn't fit the wrestlers. Here, most guys' entrance music, it's like 4 seconds of music repeating for a minute and a half. It's half-baked is giving it too much credit.
Buck Quartermain versus the X Division champion, AJ Styles.
Buck Quartermain. I lost it when I saw this name, because I remember Buck Quartermain as a jobber in WCW in the early to mid 90s. I looked it up to make sure I was correct. I was in fact correct. His first appearance in WCW was at Disney's MGM Studios, a soundstage just across town, losing to Yoshi Kwan on an episode of WCW Worldwide. He actually also had a couple matches. He had 2 or 3, maybe 4 jobber matches in 1994 for the WWF. But here he is in 2005 looking completely different, wrestling AJ Styles on Impact.
All AJ until he gets distracted by Christopher Daniels at the announce table. We see Quartermain try to put on a small package.
Oh, God.
And somehow he ends up small packaging himself. AJ got the pin attempt out of this small package.
Through no effort of his own. This is another one of those moves where time stopped. He gets about 63% of the way through this small package and just gets stuck. It's like he somehow paradise locked himself, and then eventually got rolled through by his own momentum, and AJ Styles got the near fall.
AJ jumps to the top. He hits his springboard, flying phenomenal forearm, hits the Styles Clash, and gets the easy victory. AJ grabs the mic. He wants Daniels to come in the ring now. Christopher Daniels grabs the mic. He says, "You've been ducking me for 3 years. I'm going to make you wait for the pay-per-view where they will be having a 30-minute Iron Man match for the X Division Championship."
The most shocking thing about this to me is that it's 2005 and AJ Styles has not wrestled Christopher Daniels for the X Division title. They keep saying that. Could that possibly be true? I mean, maybe they were in 3 or 4 ways, but they've not had a one-on-one match for the X Division title yet? That seems impossible.
Somebody I don't recognize is coming. We get a video for it. I don't know what it is. Again, I tried to figure out who this was. No clue.
They don't put up a name. They don't put up a graphic. He's vaguely Glacier-like. Blood
He's
may have
vaguely
been
Ultimate
running.
Warrior-ish.
Yeah.
He's Glacier-ish. I don't know what's coming.
I don't know if Blood was about to run cold in the Impact Zone. There was some green going on. He was some sort of assassin of some sort. I had no idea who he was. I did know who the next man that we saw was. It was NWA authority figure Dusty Rhodes sitting on the back of a pickup truck with a bale of hay behind him, Tracy Brooks on one arm, Trinity on the other, and he has the world's smallest laptop. I am looking at my iPhone right now, and I'm pretty sure it's twice the size of this laptop that Dusty Rhodes had in 2005.
I watched this twice because I was trying to take notes, and I watched it the first time. My notes were blank. And I'm like, no, stuff was said, but I don't know what they said.
My only note says that Trinity sounds like Rosie Perez. That's all I got. That's the only thing I got from this.
I watched it a second time, and from what I can tell, Tracy has a tag team that will represent her. Trinity will have a tag team that will represent her. And at the pay-per-view, probably the pre-show, they will have a tag team match, and the winner gets to be with Dusty Rhodes. Is what they're feuding over the right to be with Dusty Rhodes, and I think that's what this was.
Let's look something up here. I'm going to look up Dusty Rhodes' date of birth.
Sure.
Dusty Rhodes' date of birth was was someday in October 1945. So at this point,
he's
Dusty
60.
Rhodes was 60. I'm going to look up Tracy Brooks, who had been around. She was on the Indies. I believe she managed CM Punk for a while. Tracy Brooks would have been 30 at this time. So that's got big Booker booking his dreams energy going on right there.
And Dusty Rhodes was the booker for TNA at this point in time.
Exactly. Again, this only happens when you are the booker and you can write these segments for yourself.
David Young versus Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy comes out to his horrible theme song.
And that's a
theme. I think he's singing it.
Yes, that's a theme song from his band, like Peroxygen or whatever the hell it was. Like, I remember that was one of the terms of his deal with TNA at the time, was that he would get to do his own theme music. Not good.
As Jeff is posing on the ropes, David Young jumps him from behind.
Every match on this show, we should mention, every match on this show starts with the heel jumping the babyface at the end of their entrance as they get in the ring. Every single match.
This doesn't last long. Jeff quickly hits my favorite move, the Whisper in the Wind.
You love that step up, spitting back senton. You're a big fan of that.
It's the worst name for a move ever. Horrible. Hate it.
We are told the rules for this Full Metal Mayhem match between Jeff Hardy and Abyss that's coming up at Not Victory Road at Against All Odds. It's like a tables, ladders, chairs match. There are two envelopes hanging from the ceiling. One envelope is empty. One envelope has a contract for a NWA World title shot for an upcoming episode of Impact, but you don't know which envelope is empty and which one has the contract for the title shot until you pull it down. So that's the TNA twist on a ladder match.
Their twist on a squash match is that David Young is on offense for this entire time, for minutes on end. The whole, like, it won't stop. He just he's got the heat on for a long time. What is going on? I do not understand.
Well, he keeps cutting Jeff Hardy's comebacks off. It's crazy, especially given the fact that the story of this match, as told to us by Mike Tenay and Don West,
he's horrible.
Is that David Young sucks, and he has not won a match, or he's won one match in the past 2 years, and yet here he is utterly dominating Jeff Hardy.
I was so confused. Tenay's literally going over how horrible his win-loss record is as I'm watching him beat the crap out of Jeff Hardy. They use this match as a backdrop to talk about Nash training against Jeff Jarrett. They trade punches from their knees. I'm like, what is this? What am I watching?
We get dueling chants. There is a dueling
chants.
Let's go Hardy. Let's go David chant. But my favorite thing on this entire show, I'm spoiling it for you now. I don't know if you caught this, but Don West is running down the other matches that are going to be on the pay-per-view. This might actually be a match that's going to be on the pre-show because they tell us how they're super excited about this free pre-show that's happening.
Yep.
One of the matches is America's Most Wanted against Kid Cash and his partner, Lamar Hoyt. Don West, who, if you remember, would hawk baseball cards on Home Shopping Network, so clearly had a love of baseball. He screws up here, and instead of saying Lance Hoyt, the future Lance Archer, who was Kid Cash's tag partner, he says Lamar Hoyt, the former Chicago White Sox, San Diego Padres pitcher. I lost it. I cackled with joy. This made me so happy during this sad time thinking about the passing of Don West. It just brought me great joy. Don West was the best, even when he wasn't trying to be.
Hardy makes a comeback? No, he's cut off again.
And the thing about this too, the comebacks are the same, or the cutoffs. Hardy starts to make a comeback. David Young will like elbow him or shoulder him, snap mirror him, and put him in a chin lock. This happened 3 times. This exact sequence happened 3 times here in this supposed squash match.
Young misses a top rope moonsault. This allows Jeff Hardy to bring in a chair, and he does the poetry in motion, jumping off the chair, hitting Young in the corner, goes to the top, hits the swanton bomb off the top, and Hardy crushes Young with this senton off the top.
Far
and gets
across the ring. Usually, he'll have his opponent really near the corner. I feel like David Young is at least halfway across the ring, and yeah, he eats the impact.
So, 3 moves by Hardy, and he wins this match after taking a beating for all of the rest of the minutes.
He snatched victory from the jaws of defeat against a guy who has 1 win in the last 2 years, and this was a tune-up match for him to fight Abyss in a Full Metal Mayhem tables, ladders, and chairs match.
Abyss, who comes out right after the match, and Hardy ends up... Hardy sees Abyss coming out. Hardy does his own air Sabu, jumping off the chair, over the top rope, onto Abyss on the outside. They fight into the crowd. Don West goes insane during this fight. It was so awesome.
He was screaming. And the whole thing with Don West is that any other guy going nuts and screaming the way Don West does would drive me insane. But it's such genuine
sincerity,
real, sincere enthusiasm from a guy who up until 2 years prior had never seen pro wrestling and is now every week experiencing the absurdity, the ridiculousness, and the adrenaline rush, if you can say that about TNA, of pro wrestling. And sometimes there's just too much excitement for his body to hold in, and it just comes out and screams. And that's what happens here in this moment. Great stuff.
So after great stuff, What's TNA going to give you?
God.
All of the non-great stuff that they've got. Let's put it all into one segment, and we have it here backstage with Frankie Kazarian, Michael Shane, and David Young are all backstage. They are going to wrestle NASCAR's Jeff Hammond. I've got questions for you.
So Jeff Hammond is a guy that when I grew up as a kid as a NASCAR fan, Jeff Hammond was the crew chief, the championship winning crew chief for Darrell Waltrip, star driver back then, one of my favorite drivers as a little kid. He then went on to, in later years, be an announcer of sort for Fox. For Fox.
So is he
NASCAR
famous in the NASCAR community?
Well, he was famous in that NASCAR's Fox coverage, when NASCAR first got onto Fox, was built more around the announcers than the drivers of the teams, like they would do with football, with all of their broadcasts. And so they tried to make him like this big character, but he was like a B team guy. He was not like the main broadcast guy. But I mean, this is TNA. They had Hermie Sadler, who was like also ran in the Busch series, which was NASCAR's like middle division back then. And they had him wrestle. So what do they do here? Jeff Hammond is going to wrestle David Young in a match. And who tells us this? One of my favorite groups of all time. And I say that tongue planted so firmly in cheek that it's poking out the other end. 3 Live Crew, the trio of Conan, Road Dogg, and Truth.
Ron Killings, yeah.
Oh my God, what a group. 3 Live Crew, because get it? There was 2 Live Crew, but there's 3 guys. So it's 3 Live Crew.
Yeah, so next week, Jeff Hammond will wrestle. Want to know what happened?
No.
Dave Meltzer, Wrestling Observer Newsletter, reports Jeff Hammond did a, quote, match with David Young. After the reaction to Hammond taking off his shirt at the last taping, they had Hammond wrestle in a t-shirt and wearing jeans. Hammond would get brief offense, and then Shane and Kazarian would interfere. Young had Hammond down, and 3 Live Crew distracted the ref, so BG James gave Young a pump handle slam to set up Hammond doing the, quote, NASCAR elbow, whatever that is, for the pin.
The NASCAR elbow. Wow. What is it? I think I need to see that match now. If you're listening right now and you are one of our patrons, one of the people that supports us at patreon.com/wrestling at random, and you are either in the intentionalizer tier or would like to bump up to the intentionalizer tier, we are ready, willing, and able to review David Young against Jeff Hammond at any time.
Hey, you could also ask us to watch the 6-man from the pay-per-view, so we can have a curated list of Jeff Hammond matches. We go back to the arena. Lex Lovett versus Abyss. Abyss comes out with a torture rack backbreaker where he just drops down to his ass. He then hits a black hole slam, which is a modified version of the Boss Man slam, and gets the quick pin. Abyss pulls a table into the ring. He tries to set it up, and in doing so, he breaks one of the table legs inadvertently. He, to his credit, is able to get it set up. Just as Jeff Hardy runs in, he gets kicked in the face. Abyss presses Jeff. Jeff counters it into a DDT, putting them both through the table. And we get more of Jeff Hardy's terrible theme song as we go to commercial.
Yeah, the terrible theme song aside, I enjoyed this. For one, we had Abyss just killing this dude instead of the star selling for the jobber the entire time. I love the black hole slam. That's, like you said, that spinning Boss Man slam. I really liked Abyss. He was one of the few success stories as far as like a homegrown TNA guy that just, I mean, obviously things got really convoluted later on, but to me, more often than not, the build to his matches was fun, and the pay-per-view matches always delivered and were different than anything else on the show. And I also like that here on this 1 hour show, we should mention it's a 1 hour edition of Impact back then on Fox Sports Net. we have a storyline that goes through several segments. You could argue we had the same thing earlier with X Division and Chris Daniels being out ringside, but here we have, I didn't expect Abyss to be in a match after that pull apart, and then I did not expect Jeff Hardy to come back out and attack him and put him through a table. So I like that, and I'm like watching this. I'm hyped. I want to see that match, even with the 2 envelope stipulation. I want to see what these guys are going to do to each other at the pay-per-view.
So as a non-watcher of TNA, I never had much of experience with Abyss matches. It was just like, oh, okay. Is this guy a knockoff Mankind? Is he, from a distance?
He was a knockoff Mankind and a knockoff Kane combined. That's what the character was.
So I'm just like, whatever. It wasn't until I saw him wrestle a match at Ring of Honor in Chicago, suburban Chicago. He wrestled on a Ring of Honor show, and he was so much bigger than all of the Ring of Honor guys, and all these guys were just bumping around like crazy for him, and he was he gave it 150% at this Ring of Honor show, and I'm like, this Abyss is awesome. And it was the first time he won me over was watching Abyss in Ring of Honor.
He's a guy that's a really good point. When you would see him live, like you
so much bigger than you.
Got it. And especially when you see him live on an indie show, because the guys were usually small. I remember the first time I saw him live was in I believe it was the fall or late summer of 2005 on an co-promoted IWA Mid-South / NWA Midwest show in Muscatine, Iowa, of all places. I've said before that the best way I could describe that town is it looked like the abandoned set of a John Mellencamp video. And Abyss wrestled Tyler Black, the future Seth Rollins, in a street fight. And it was awesome. And I was front row, and it was exactly that reaction of like, my God, this dude is massive. He's tall, he's huge. And like when you saw him live on a show like that, it gave you a little bit of that, wrestling's dangerous sort of feel that you didn't get a lot at modern wrestling shows. So, I have a lot of time for Abyss.
Shane Douglas is in the back with Kevin Nash. A reminder, Kevin Nash is your number 1 contender for the title. He's getting a massage from a random lady, not Shane Douglas. And so Nash is getting his massage, and Jeff Jarrett tries to sneak in, but Nash is looking up. He can see in the mirror the reflection of Jeff Jarrett coming in. Nash rolls out of the way as Jarrett swings the guitar, smashing it against the massage table. Nash rolls off the table just in time.
This is one of the most unintentionally hilarious things I have ever seen on a professional wrestling show.
Did I make it sound more dramatic and better than it actually was?
Well, yes. I mean, I love this, not because it was good, but because it was exactly what you said. If people follow us on Twitter, they have seen this dramatic moment.
This is the GIF?
This is the GIF, okay. Absolutely. When I watch it, I'm like, there's no other decision. There's other things on the show, but there's nothing like this. There's so many great things about this. Shane Douglas looking exactly like he did as ECW World Champion, but here he's just a backstage commentator wearing his trademark yellow, talking seriously about how hard Kevin Nash is training, as Kevin Nash is laying face down, face buried in towel, being massaged upon. Then all of a sudden Kevin Nash looks up, but we don't know that there's a mirror. So I'm like, why is he looking up like 7/8 of the way towards the camera, but not completely at the camera? Then the door opens and Jeff Jarrett dramatically appears and attempts to murder him with a guitar shot to the back of the head. But Kevin Nash saw him in this mirror that we don't know is there and goes to chase him off. And at first I'm like, are we going to see naked Kevin Nash chasing off Jeff Jarrett? But he's apparently wearing bicycle shorts, looking like a master blaster. So we don't have that, at least. We do get, though, one more piece of this story.
The story's not over. The story is not over. But so while this is ridiculous, I do want to say this might be the best shape Kevin Nash was ever in wrestling.
Yes.
Like, I mean, when he got out of wrestling and became, started doing movie roles, he got pretty jacked and such. But here, he looked lean and was in tremendous shape here. He looked like $1 million, Kevin Nash here.
Yeah, he looked great, and I'm oddly intrigued to see this Kevin Nash Jeff Jarrett match.
The reviews, when I read the recap, it actually it was totally fine. The expectations were it was going to be unbearable.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, yeah, this is totally fine. And it kept it a thumbs up show because the rest of the show was great.
Which is not your expectation going in with 2005 Kevin Nash against a Jeff Jarrett that you could not get away from in TNA.
The main event of this show, the Naturals versus a favorite of this podcast that I didn't know he was a favorite of mine until we started doing this podcast, Monty Brown. And his partner, Diamond Dallas Page, the natural pairing of Monty Brown and DDP.
The randomized pairing of the alpha male Monty Brown and Diamond Dallas Page here in 2005, as you mentioned, taking on the Naturals, a team who have been featured on almost every episode of TNA that we've reviewed. They were in the main event of one of the other Impact episodes we reviewed from around this time period. I can't remember who it was against, but I recall.
Am I still going to call them blonde natural, brown-haired natural? Yes, I am. Yeah. Do I still not know their names? Correct.
You refuse to acknowledge that Chase is the blonde-haired one and Andy is the dark-haired one. Is this like FTR bald and FTR hair?
It is, but only because like these guys are just so. They were around forever and were so undescript and no charisma, interchangeable zeros. Like they would be immediately signed to NXT.
Yes.
If NXT existed today.
They would be top tier NXT 2.0 talent,
yes.
feuding with Pretty Deadly in that promotion. But we saw them as a heel tag team going into, I think, actually wrestling against America's Most Wanted. We saw them as a heel tag team slowly turning babyface, being berated by Shane Douglas as Bobby Knight.
Wow,
basically.
good memory. Wow.
I remember that being so weird. And then here in 2005, they clearly are not as pushed as they were, but they are taking on the makeshift team of DDP and Monty Brown, who I guess there was a three-way with the two of them and Kevin Nash at the last pay-per-view to determine the number one contender. Nash won it, but there was a bond forged in combat between DDP and Monty Brown, and they are now teaming up here. And this is a tune-up as they will wrestle at Against All Odds against the natural duo of Bobby Roode representing Team Canada and his not Canadian tag team partner, Scott Hall.
And I was reading about this, and apparently Scott Hall had all kinds of problems leading into that match.
Shocking.
And I don't even know if that match happened because Scott Hall, there was like the drug and alcohol fueled craziness coming back from a trip to Korea, and like all this stuff is crazy. So like it was a real bad period for Scott Hall here, and I don't think that match happened. Or if it did, it was like real quick to moving on because Scott Hall was having so many problems at that time. DDP comes out. He goes through the crowd. He is loved by the people.
He also has a knockoff of his knockoff of Smells Like Teen Spirit is his entrance music here. By TNA standards, they did a great job with this.
The Naturals jump Brown and Page from behind like every match. It's how every match started.
Every single match. Again, not an exaggeration. The heel jumps the babyface or the babyface team as they're entering the ring.
DDP whips dark-haired natural into Monty Brown, and
Andy
Brown
Douglas.
and Brown backdrops him over the top rope to the floor onto Chase. Is that his partner? His partner's name is Chase?
It is Chase. The blonde-haired one is Chase. That is Andy Douglas and Chase Stevens. They have names.
After commercial, Naturals get the heat on DDP, and this is boring.
Not only is it
Nothing
boring,
happens.
it is terrible. We do learn that dignitaries such as Ed Schumann, who I remember seeing at NWA Midwest shows all the time, Reggie Parks, the former wrestler and belt creator extraordinaire, and Bugsy McGraw are in attendance here at the show, as well as some like C-level actors. This heat goes on for so long that we get a loud chant from the crowd of "Tag in Monty!" Clap, 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 clap.
Brown gets frustrated. The ref's putting him out of the ring. More double teaming by the Naturals. DDP finally makes the hot tag to Monty, and he runs wild.
Well, before he finally makes that hot tag, Jeremy, you are leaving out what was going to be the gif if A, the Kevin Nash thing hadn't happened, and B, if I didn't like DDP so much. This is terrible. So they're doing the spot. Andy Douglas has DDP in a front face lock. DDP is trying to backdrop Andy Douglas out of this as Chase Stevens is coming into the ring. So he'll backdrop one natural onto the other, but his back gives way. And Chase Stevens basically saves both their lives, saves Andy Douglas and DDP's lives by coming in and like stopping this slow motion train wreck from happening. He goes back outside of the ring, comes back in. They repeat the exact same spot successfully this time. DDP backdrops one natural onto the other and makes the tag to Monty Brown, as you said.
Double underhook suplex, and Monty goes for a press slam, but he slips, and the natural starts to fall. Monty catches him anyway and hits a fall-away slam. Awesome display of power to save this from being a disaster.
Incredible power. I thought initially he might be going for a variation of that Goldberg press slam into the over-the-shoulder power slam, which to me as an aside belongs on the pantheon of the Mount Rushmore of
setup moves that are better than a finish.
Yeah, setup moves that are better than the finisher. There's so many examples of that in pro wrestling in modern times, in the past, and every single time I saw him do that, or I'd play Revenge and I would use that move, I'm like, why is that not his finisher? Why is that the setup move for the jackhammer? This is the move. A press slam into a power slam.
He was not doing that here. He was just trying to save this man's life. Hits that fall-away slam. Awesome power. Monty then hits the pounce on Chase.
Yes, on Chase Stevens. He pounces him, and Chase Stevens goes careening across the ring and lands on top of DDP. Again, another terrifying moment where someone could have been ended.
There's nothing better than Monty Brown doing a pounce.
Best.
It's the best. I didn't know how much I needed in my life, and as soon as Monty Brown gets on my TV, the first thing I'm saying is like, I better get a pounce, and it better be like the quality of pounce I'm expecting. Yeah, so
that's there needs to be. I don't know if there is. I can't believe I've never searched for this on YouTube. There needs to be a pounce supercut of every pounce that this man has hit. Like you see really cool 5-10 minute video things of DDP actually hitting the diamond cutter from different positions. Like I know there's that on YouTube. There needs to be a pounce supercut.
DDP with a diamond cutter here to get the victory.
Yeah, he hits the cutter. Then Monty pins the other natural who had just been pounced, and they get the win. Nowhere near enough Monty in this match, but I'll take it.
No, but I'm flying high. I got to see a pounce, got to see a diamond cutter. Good finish. Boring in the middle. The Heat segment was too long and boring. This is another one where it's like there's 8 minutes left in the show, and the Fox box tells me that there's 15 minutes in this match.
Yes.
So
I know they're not going to run long in the Chicago Bulls pregame.
So yeah, what I wanted was Mike Tenay or Don West to address this. How are we going to handle this if we run out of TV time, but you've allocated 15 minutes to this? So how are we handling this?
You should have just said TV time remaining. If there are 8 minutes and 32 seconds left when the bell rings,
take the box off and it says TV. Just it can just say the words TV time remaining. Yeah. Like
either one of those things
fixed it.
Either say TV time remaining or start it with the amount of time left on the TV show.
Yep.
and go from there. Either of those would have been better than 15-minute time limit with no explanation of what is Fox Sports Chicago going to do if they can't show the Chicago Bulls pregame show because the Naturals are still wrestling.
In the back, we see Kevin Nash going into Jeff Jarrett's locker room in a towel. And did I see this right? Was this in slow motion?
It was in dramatic slow motion. We had mean, angry, blank-faced Kevin Nash wearing only a towel, moving at quarter speed toward Jeff Jarrett's locker room. And the show fades to black and says, "This is TNA," as he gets to the locker room.
This is your cliffhanger. This is your cliffhanger for next week.
The cliffhanger was, what will naked Kevin Nash do when he gets to Jeff Jarrett's locker room looking for revenge? That was supposed to get us to tune in to the next week's program.
The slow motion choice is so weird.
It was very weird because there's nary a moment of slow motion on the show. This isn't like wrestling in the late 80s or 90s where we get slow motion replays after the match. None of that. The only time we got slow motion is for Kevin Nash angrily, blank-faced, walking from his locker room to Jeff Jarrett's locker room wearing nothing but a towel.
TNA Impact 2005. Adam, your favorite thing on this show?
I'm just going to say it flat out. There were some dumb things on this show, but I enjoyed this. This was a fast hour. There were some things that were annoying. The repetitiveness of every single match, the heel jumping the baby face to start. But we had good X Division focus. We didn't waste too much time with Shark Boy. I got to see a Petey Williams Canadian Destroyer. We got a glimpse of AJ Styles being incredible. Monty Brown doing pounces was fun, but without a doubt, my favorite thing on this show was everything about the first of the two Kevin Nash, Jeff Jarrett backstage segments. It was so bad, but it was the so bad that was enjoyable. Like I that made me want to see that match.
Yeah, for me, I'd say Mike Tenay and Don West immediately catching me up. I know exactly where I am. I know exactly what's going on. And I know exactly who everybody is and what's happening. So, like, they did a tremendous job of catching up a new viewer. If you're a new viewer who just dropped in, you were immediately caught up.
Which is even more important for a show on Fox Sports Net, where in every single market, it's airing at different times. It might be airing at 2 a.m. It might be airing a week late. And so you have no idea who's going to be just wandering in to watch this show. So catching people up, great idea.
AJ was great. The Pounce was fantastic. The Canadian Destroyer was always impressive. And an Abyss squash match. So I think, the show was a super easy watch. On this, I mean, there was nothing on the level of a Dup Cup or nothing on the level of some of the, there's annoying things, but I mean, there are some TNA head scratchers throughout the life of this promotion. Nothing like that on the show here. No. Totally serviceable, totally fine, and an easy hour of wrestling.
Which is not something you could always say about TNA. An easy watch, an easy hour, an easy 2 hours, an easy 3-hour pay-per-view. More often than not, that was not the case. The only really truly bad thing I think on the show, like bad in not a fun bad way, was just whatever that Dusty Rhodes backstage segment was. Like that just was weird and bad, and was just a booker at 6 years old wanting to be around young women.
Yeah, the Dusty Rhodes thing was bad. That Jeff Hardy getting dominated by David Young for so long was bad and confusing, and I don't know what's going on. Why is this happening is all I could think the entire time. It's like, why didn't it none of it made any sense to me. And
the thing is, you could have made it make sense pretty easily if you did that exact match after Abyss had attacked Jeff Hardy backstage prior. And so Jeff Hardy's hurt and he's selling.
Sure.
And so this David Young, who doesn't win but is somewhat competent, can get the advantage on Jeff Hardy till he comes back gets the win.
But he's also not the right guy. You can't then tell me that he's never wins.
No.
And he's got the worst win-loss record, period. Like, you need a Jobber Plus guy then to be taking advantage of a injured Jeff Hardy. But that's not what this was. This was, you're not telling me how injured Jeff Hardy is. Jeff Hardy is not acting injured at all from the beatdown from the prior week. And you're telling me how terrible this guy is, and I'm watching him dominate the guy who's going to be in the semi-main of your next pay-per-view. So that was, for me, by far the worst thing on this show. The 3 Live Crew stuff, talking about Jeff Hammond, also is honorable mention for being terrible. But
I'll agree with you, though. I'm amending everything I said about the worst thing on the show, because, yes, that was bad, and it was so counterproductive, and it made no sense, that being the David Young domination of Jeff Hardy. The other dumb things are just dumb throwaway things. The Dusty stuff, the Jeff Hammond stuff, it didn't matter. This was trying to sell one of the most anticipated matches on the pay-per-view and undercutting it for no reason whatsoever.
And if you want to support the show, we need your support. There's a couple ways to do that. Number one is going to our Patreon, patreon.com/wrestling at random. We mentioned it throughout this show. That's where there's bonus episodes. We put out a bonus episode every single week over there. That is, you sign up for the lowest tier for 1 month. It unlocks over 100 episodes in the back catalog for you to listen to right now. All unique, all evergreen. You can go listen to our reviews of TNA pay-per-views and other things right now in that back catalog. It's all there for you. It's 100+ episodes. You get $5 right now as a price point. Just unlocks the entire back catalog. Unbelievable. You can do that, or if you're an Apple Podcast subscriber, you can unlock it just by clicking the subscribe button in your Apple Podcast feed. It will charge you for the month and unlock all of it right there in the same feed that you're listening to this show in right now if you're an Apple Podcast user. So all of that is what you can do. If you're a Patreon subscriber, though, you also get the tier where you can bump yourself up, not only get the bonus audio, but you can be the randomizer. You can make us a curated list of something to watch. You can tell us to watch a show or match that's important to you. As long as it's more than 10 years old, we will go ahead and watch it. So you shoot us a message, say, please watch this. We do. You bump yourself back down to the lower tier, continue to get all of that bonus content every single week. If you cannot support the show financially during these times, we totally understand as well. The other way to support the show is by telling a wrestling fan friend about the show. Wrestling fans know other wrestling fans, so go out and tell them about the show and continue to spread the word. We rely on your word of mouth. Show them how to subscribe to this podcast, and if you want to consume the podcast via video, you can support the show. Even if you only listen via audio, you can still support us by throwing us a subscribe over at the YouTube. Go to the YouTube channel at Wrestling at Random Podcast. At the YouTube channel, give us a subscribe there. The more subscribers we have, it helps us work the algorithm so that other wrestling fans can find the show as well. So those are all easy ways, and interact with the show. We love to hear from you. We've got the best listeners. When we send out a thing of during the broadcast, an hour after the show drops, we've got people tweeting at us, hey man, it's because of this, that, and the other. Yes. Just last week we were talking about Vince McMahon. Why is Vince McMahon pausing and not saying anything on the Championship Wrestling episode that we reviewed last week? Moments after that show dropped, we had actually one of our patrons, Patron Kendall, replying and saying, hey guys, he pauses because Howard Finkel gets inserted in there for local promos. It's like, okay, makes a ton of sense. We didn't know. We know immediately because we have some of the best folks listening to this podcast. So we'd love to interact with you guys. So send us a message on Twitter, or you can also DM us on Instagram. Either way, you should be following the show at Wrestle at Random on both platforms. And those are all the ways to support the show. We appreciate every single one of you. That was a mouthful.
No, I agree, though, Jeremy. And we appreciate everyone who supports the show. Obviously, everyone who listens to the show on the free feed. That helps. We love that you listen to the show. We love everyone, like you said, that supports on the Patreon or at Apple Podcasts. Our intentionalizers over on the bonus feed. bring us some of the best stuff, some of the worst stuff, some of the most ridiculous things, curated match lists that sometimes are a single wrestler, sometimes 3 matches that have nothing to do with each other than the person who paid to support the show thought, I want these guys to watch those 3 matches and review it. We do every single time, and it's great fun. Jeremy, by the way, if we're doing this, if people are listening in linear fashion, we've entered the year 2023. Does that technically mean that in the bonus feed, in the Patreon, someone could request a show from 2013? Is 2013 now in the mix?
2013 is in the mix. Now that we've crossed the calendar year of 2023, I will in fact be loading 2013 into the randomizer. We're going to be giving it some more spins here. We've got a few more episodes left here in season 4, so we will be season 4. The theme is we're busting at the seams, and I'm actually going to put more into the randomizer, if you can believe it. All of 2013 will make it in there. So as long as it's 10 years, we're going to watch it. And with that, we are going to call it a podcast. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you, Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, for providing us an hour of easy-to-watch professional wrestling, particularly, again, if you're listening in linear fashion, after we endured what we endured last week when Jeremy forced us to watch 2 consecutive episodes of WWF Championship Wrestling from 1983. TNA was thankfully an easy watch, a palate cleanser, and I am ready for what comes next in season 4.
Thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you again next time.